people talk a lot about environmental impact and sustainability, and
Hmm.
they talk about that in the way that they build the packaging for a product. But in my mind, like the thing that's the most sustainable is a product that people aren't going to throw away. And I feel like Sendy kind of, it's clever in the way that you don't throw away your gear, you find a new home for it. And especially now, there just appears to be so many different people picking up, used gear because it's affordable because the price of some of this stuff is just out of
Yeah.
control.
I would love, Ian, for you to kind of just give the listeners kind of high level, what Sendy is, how long you've been doing it, what the benefits are. I think that'd be super useful for those unfamiliar.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. So Sendy is an adventure sports marketplace. So we enable users to buy, sell, or rent adventure sports equipment. It's live in the US and Canada. You're able to list your gear either for sale or for rent, and it will ship via UPS anywhere in the US and Canada. It can cross borders as well. But really, we see it as just connecting the adventure sports community. I'm one of those guys who I used to play soccer until I was probably like 14, 15. And then I discovered mountain biking and surfing and those things. And I just wanted nothing to do with the team sports. I've, for basically the rest of my life, dedicated them into chasing, dreams and mountains and waves. And I feel like there are a lot of us out there. And there's a lot of crossover between sports as well, like probably more so than ever. And so really, I think I was shocked, and I think Travis was shocked as well, that Sendy did not already exist. It was kind of like one of those ideas that once we started talking about it, it's like, how is this not a thing already? Like one of those super obvious, like gaping holes in an industry that you really don't find that often. And I think what was also shocking to me is that platforms like Sendy exist for many other industries and many other passions and sports and everything. Like team sports, it exists. Musicians, it exists with Reverb. It exists for like camera equipment. Etsy's for like arts and crafts and whatnot. Poshmark is for like fashion, real, all of those. Like they all exist in these different industries. And then we have an industry that is so committed to community, so committed to environmental responsibility and sustainability. But at the same time, like there was no technological platform that would allow people to actually, I guess, like act upon those values. And so in part, Sendy was like just this missing piece of our entire community and industry. And we wanted to like build that software, provide that connection for everybody, both to like meet each other, get together, and also to like find what they're looking for.
Before we go into the ethos and all the elements that kind of make up Sendy, because there's a lot to really dig into here. How did the relationship with Travis and Cam, who, are a big part of Sendy, how did that come to be? And then how did this conversation sort of form?
Yeah, so Travis and I met probably 10 years ago up at Baldface, actually. So outside of Nelson's cat skiing operation, kind of very core and close to the heart of the snowboard community in particular, I'd say. And I ended up on a trip out there with another friend of mine, this guy Joey, who's his family owned Whistler Resort, and I was in Whistler riding with him, and he pretty much like last minute was like, "Hey, I've got 2 seats on a cat and Baldface." There was a storm coming in like literally the next day, and so we made it happen, and then ended up on a cat with myself, Joey, Cersei Wallace, which is Travis's manager, Travis. We had, just Jamie Lynn, like bunch of absolute legends in this cat. And we had probably one of the most fun weeks of my life. I mean, we had 3-4 feet of powder. It was phenomenal. So through the course of that, Travis and I, just became friends. We were riding together and had a good time. And but at the same time, it was like a bald face friendship. It's like, you don't know if you'll see someone again or not. And
Jeff is kind of the mysterious connector up there of all people, right? That guy has kind of the
oh
best
yeah,
life of anyone.
he certainly does. Yeah. And he was in the cat all week with us.
Yeah.
I mean, now he's the most insane pow surfer. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but he's riding stuff on a pow surfer that like a lot of people won't snowboard. It's pretty cool. But so Yeah, a couple months after that trip, maybe even a few months after, Travis hit me up out of the blue and was like, hey, you want to go on a surf trip? I've got a cabin. I want to share it with someone. And I was like, sure. Where are we going? He's like, literally, we were leaving in 48 hours on a Sunday. And we ended up going out to Tahiti, or not Tahiti, Fiji, and went to spent like a week at Cloudbreak. And so that I think pretty much cemented our friendship. And then since then, we've, done a lot of trips together. He often comes and stays in Hawaii or BC with me. And then yeah, we pretty much we were on a trip in Kauai surfing together. Travis loves surfing as much as snowboarding, I would say. He's actually a pretty good surfer too. And we were out in the water. I had been marinating on this like a little bit while I was up in Alaska, up at the Natural Selection Tour, like the first one. It's really when like the initial seeds of what became Sendy, like were kind of starting to form in my mind. And then in Kauai, I started talking about with Travis, and literally for the next 7 days, it's all we talked about. Like it was driving our girlfriends nuts. But it just when the idea like starts to spin, it's like, and this, and we need this, and we could do this, right? And it really started evolving in that conversational mode to the point where by the end of the week, I was like, all right, we need to explore how this can be done. And that's when I really started in earnest to put the pieces together.
Where did Cam come from then? And because I think one of the things that makes this successful too is that it's not just one vertical, because I'm sure there are buy sell forums all over the internet for snowboard only and mountain bike only. And I think the thing that's really interesting is that if you're a mountain biker, you know kind of where to go hunt down deals and stuff. But most people who are mountain bikers are also skiers and snowboarders and might not have those connects. And so the used market actually makes a ton of sense for people that aren't in all the verticals, right? To get a better deal or to get better equipment or whatever. So you had to kind of branch out beyond snowboarding and surfing. How did the Cam
Yeah.
connection come through?
Yeah, so I actually met Cam for the first time at Kelly Slater Wave Pool, and I was there again with Travis, with Michael Schwab, who's a big backer of Sendy. He's like one of the co-owners of the Wave Pool as well. So we had a pretty incredible crew there too. And Cam, I guess this was 3 years ago. He just took a major spill at Rampage like 2 days before this trip. And then, like, we didn't think he was going to make it. He literally went to the hospital. And then he gets out of the hospital and drives straight from Utah to the wave pool, shows up with his whole family, and spends 2 days with us. So, I got to meet Cam and I just realized like what an incredible guy he is. He's like seriously one of the most humble, hardworking, really smart, like just yeah, just an incredible human being. And after hanging out a couple days with him, Travis pretty much came up and was like, "Hey, man, I think we should bring Cam into Sendy. I think he would just add so much." And I sat down right there and then with Cam and was like, "Hey, Cam, this is what we're working on. This is kind of what we're thinking." And he was like, "I'm in 100%." So, yeah, Cam has done he's done so much for us and like as a team. And we've backed his Cam Zink Invitational event outside of Reno a couple years, and like watching him work within the community and like bringing up some of the younger riders and just seeing like ethically like where he is really inspiring. And so yeah, I literally couldn't have better co-founders. They're both like brilliant and amazing. Yeah, and then we have actually another co-founder that's kind of lesser known, but it's Stephen Carr. He's one of the co-founders of Guayaki Yerba Mate, which is that
Mhm.
yellow can energy drink. A lot of people, it's pretty recognizable these days. So those guys are like, they've been friends of mine for a long time too, and two brothers that started it. And the thing that was most impressive about them and their company was they've worked for 25 years together building that brand, and they have the same leadership team, the same board, the same management. They all love each other. They all go on surf trips together. Like it's phenomenal that someone can get through 25 years of business together and still love each other enough to go on a 2 week surf trip, right? And so like that to me was like the dream of what we were trying to build at Sendy, like something very sustainable, very enduring and long term, like both on an energetic level, and then obviously things need to add up financially as well. But really it's about like capturing that energy and holding it for as long as possible. And Steven was a big inspiration in all of that.
Lucy, he's a great one for a future pod as well. His whole background and everything. Ian, you and I have a lot more connective tissue than we're probably aware. I did a year-long interim CMO stint at Canacraft, and obviously those guys were deeply involved as well. And
yeah, 100%. Okay,
and
cool.
you mentioned another name, Lucy, that you need to write down as well, and you got to have Schwab on the future podcast as well.
Yeah.
Talk the ultimate adventure capitalist for sure.
Yeah, Schwabi's definitely one of the good guys. He's like, he comes out of a world of like heavy finance, but he like discovered surfing and adventure sports. And he's one of those guys, like, this is why I believe in the magic of what we do, right? It's like he just had that light bulb go on in his head and realized like, this is the coolest thing that I could possibly do with my life. And then devoted entirety of all of his energy into pursuing those passions. And like, I've never seen someone post 40 get good at surfing. It's just like not really a thing, and he picked up surfing and is now getting barreled in Indonesia, right? He's like 50 something. I'm like, it's pretty cool. Like, it's real dedication to like come into surfing as like a fully mature adult and then go and catch some barrels in Indonesia. It's like, that's quite a life accomplishment, I think.
That's cool. That's really cool. Well, so what were the first steps? I mean, once you had Travis and you had Cam kind of on board and you had this concept solidified, what were sort of the first couple steps that you were taking after you had everything more or less figured out to get started?
So like, I've always been very entrepreneurial. So I started my very first company like right out of college. It was called Balsa Tribe. We were making sustainable surfboards on the Pacific coast of Ecuador. And it was, incredible business. I ran it for 5 years, ended up selling it to a Spanish company when I was probably 28, went on to start 2 or 3 other businesses. So I feel like I'm now at a point where I have kind of a recipe. Like, you go in to start a business and it's like baking a cake or building a house or doing anything. Like, once you've done it a few times, you're like, I need this, I need this, I need this, and this goes here, and this goes here, and this goes there, and then it's done, right? And so I think I had a pretty good concept of most of the things in terms of like building the brand, the structure, the initial financing, getting all the nuts and bolts together. And really where I was weak was on the software side. And that was the most work for me, was to like bring myself up to speed with how would we achieve this from a technical perspective, and then building the team that was actually going to build the product itself. And very quickly we moved away from using like a prepackaged like Shopify kind of tech stack that's kind of out of the box, because it just does not allow for the type of user experience and customization that we needed to like really achieve what we wanted to for this industry. So we built everything from scratch, from line 1 of code built from scratch at Sendy. And so in order to put that team together, I did pretty much 60 days of interviews. I interviewed what ended up being 35 different teams. And mostly I was interviewing for the personal relationship, because that's the most important. And then secondary for like technical skills and work ethic. And I ended up working with a fellow named Vlad in Kyiv, Ukraine. And Kyiv and Ukraine in general, I would say is and certainly was an emerging tech hub within Europe. There's nowhere else in Europe that has like the software development power that Eastern Europe has, and particularly Ukraine. They have technical schools that kids when they're 15 are going to, right? It's just like they're on a whole other level on certain, things like that. So Vlad and I ended up, connecting, had a very good relationship. We started to work together, and that was before the war started in Ukraine, 4 or 5 months before. And yeah, we pretty much just built an incredible relationship on Zoom. The war started, and I had this like crazy moment of like, there's a lot on the line here, right? I've got my money, investors' money, lots of time, lots of goals and visions. I have a team that I love in Ukraine. He was literally like fleeing in the car, calling me on WhatsApp. There was like cruise missiles we could hear in the background. It was like the first like 24 hours were like absolutely nerve wracking. Like, I don't think I slept, right? I was up at 3 a.m. on the phone with him, driving to Western Ukraine. And so we definitely had this moment where uh, it was like, I am all in with these guys, or I need to figure out something different. And the way that they conducted themselves in the first week of the war was so impressive to me that I basically like dedicated entirely to them. And we still have the exact same technical team that we started building the product with more than 3 years ago. So we have the same
That's
team in Ukraine.
incredible. The backstory and the timing on that is absolutely wild. And talk about being pressure tested and come to that. Can I ask a question that steps back one step to that? Like, you've said that,
Yeah.
your background was not in software, and that was a deficiency and a blind spot maybe for you. Even to get to that step of engaging with 50 different teams or individuals to get the RFP process, like, there's a lot of people that talk around app and app development and technology through second nature. So I think for the guests, it'd be, as much as you're able or willing to share on that front, like, with that being not a familiar place for you to go into, how do you even know who to start talking to in those spaces?
Yeah, that is a great question. And for me, I was never at a point of 100% certainty in my own ability. There was still a risk that I was wrong or that I was missing something. And there was a certain amount of luck that I ended up with such an incredible team, even though I was interviewing hard. But really, a lot of it is looking at, like, if you're trying to build a product, who's built products similar, what kinds of tech stacks have they used, are you talking to developers that are proficient in that tech stack, what kind of projects can they point to, checking references for people that they've worked with, and then honestly probably 150 hours of YouTubing of like, what are the benefits of this tech stack versus that tech stack. And then I think like the initial product was built in a certain way, and then as soon as you get it like halfway developed, somewhat out the door, then immediately you start learning endless amounts of lessons. And so, to make Sendy work right now, we have 37 different pieces of software that all talk to each other in different ways throughout the experience. And I don't think that when we started day one, we would have envisioned where we are today. But I think the most important thing is that you have to start somewhere. So being decisive in the early days, being like, this is what we're going to try and accomplish. This is our best guess of the tech stack and the way that we're going to accomplish that. And then start the process and start learning immediately and be quick to adapt.
When you talk about the tech stack too, you obviously, the website has got to be your sort of foundation for everything, and sort of the back end that enables that. But one of the other things that you also have is an app that's, essentially the same features and function, just available mobile as opposed to going to a website. How did that process work out? Is this the same team that's just capable of doing both, and it's sort of just translating it to mobile format, or is there a different consideration when it comes to making the app? And just to add on to that, to make it even more complicated question, like, is it worth it to have the app? I mean, like, what impact does that have in addition to having a website that's already so stout?
Yeah, that's the great questions there. So, one of the things I may have done differently is started with the website and launched with the website, where we actually launched with the app first. So we built apps on iOS and Android. They're still available in the App Store, 5-star ratings, like, pretty proud of them. Always lots of work to do and improvements, but so far so good. But so we launched the app. We put it out. We built a very beautiful, robust brand before we even launched. And then we launched and immediately had over 2,000 users on the app. So like within the first, 6 hours, we were catching dozens, if not hundreds of bugs that we had missed previous. And I think one of the beauties of launching with an app is we immediately got a very dedicated community of users, where if you launch with a website, and if you're using a website, maybe you'll visit it, maybe you'll come back, maybe not. It's, you browse websites incredibly quickly. Whereas like if you're downloading an app, creating an account, getting in there, there's a little more buy-in, a little more commitment on behalf of the user. And I think that got us enough of an engaged audience that it allowed us to really keep building and improving the app based on real user feedback, which is the most important part of tech, going back to the earlier question. So we launched both apps in November of 2022. This is actually an insane story because we launched the app the moment I was crossing the border from Poland into Ukraine. And like, you can't even make this stuff up, but it just happened that way. And so we launched both apps, and then in February of 2023, we launched the website. And then the website is optimized for like all different screen sizes, mobile, desktop, etc. And then, like I said, it's really about user feedback. So we went on to build like retailer functionality, way more rental functionality, lots of different like alerts and comments and messages, and a lot of like engagement platforms that we hadn't necessarily like built to start, but it came as we saw how the app was being used and kind of like what we were missing. And then we translated a lot to the website from what we learned in the app. Whereas I think a cheaper, smarter way to go might be to launch a website first and then build the app. But, we didn't do that.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the retailer side of things, because, we know Sendy is something where anybody can post their bike or their skis or their snowboard and either rent it out or sell it through the functionality that you've created. But one thing that we were talking about off air was just how retailers are beginning to use Sendy as sort of another channel as well. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
We launched Sendy very consumer, what we would call customer community focused. And that's still like our primary focus, is like we really engage with people across social media, advertising, events, etc. We engage them on an individual level. And most of our buyers they're coming to us because of like the platform we built and the fact that it's very consumer facing, consumer friendly. And so all of our original postings for the first year or so that we were in business were from individuals. So that would be like someone in Crested Butte, they've got a split board setup that they're trying to sell. They post on Sendy. Somebody in say Bend, Oregon can buy it. It ships via UPS. The entire transaction secured by Sendy, and that was our original core business. But in doing so, what we ended up with was a product like the software that really instantly optimizes somebody's post. So that same split board setup, as soon as it's posted on Sendy, it's instantly optimized to go like top of Google Shopping, featured in Instagram advertising, Facebook Marketplace advertising, highly optimized from a software perspective to sell, because that's the value that we provide. And so individuals were finding that value, and we were kind of shocked because we're like, whoa, the Sendy postings are like beating out REI and backcountry.com for like organic search listings on Google. Like that's interesting. It's hard to do, right? These are big dogs. They spend a lot of money. And so, we ended up having several retailers that started posting gear onto Sendy and basically selling through inventory from their physical location now to a national audience on Sendy. And so I think the few things that we've been able to offer the retailer are, one, we have a captive audience. We've got, a couple 100,000 people on the Sendy website every single month. We've got, 22,000 app users. So there's already a captive audience looking for this type of gear. But then the other thing is that we're now saving them their entire e-commerce budget, which means like website building, team building, advertising, optimizations, because that small retailer, in order to compete in a national e-commerce market, they need to compete directly against REI and backcountry.com, et cetera, for these types of searches, which means that they need to be spending serious ad dollars and have everything perfectly optimized to be able to win those search battles. Whereas like with Sendy, it's like, yeah, we take an 11% commission on our sales, but we also plow the entirety of that back into advertising. And the site is built to compete for those key search terms. And, I think part of us going so broad, like some people don't see sports like whitewater kayaking and like, wakeboarding as connected, or like surfing and mountain biking as connected. And like, and maybe they aren't, but they are for us, because we do all of those things. My garage is full of all of those things. Most of my friends do all of those things. There's a lot of overlap and crossover, so for us they're connected. It's the same part of our brain that we're using, which is important. But the other thing that it does is it allows us even more breadth and volume to take, say, more internet real estate, right? Like every time someone creates a post or a listing on Sendy, we're having more space that we're taking up on the internet. The web grows. So Sendy's website is now more than 38,000 pages, right? And it grows more and more every single day. And so, once we get to a certain, like, it's literally taking internet real estate, and the more and more we post, the more we create, the more pages are created, the more searchable they are, and everything begins to work together to sell more product, which ultimately for a retailer, like, to access a national audience without paying any money or having an e-com team and being able to compete against people that most have already given up hope on competing against, it's a pretty cool thing.
As it like right now, do you guys have a criteria that's in place that like incentivizes or only enables maybe those smaller independent retailers? Because even if I'm Backcountry or REI or any one of the big dogs, if all of a sudden you're helping on that exploration side for people to see gear through you that they may not be channeling, it's a matter of time till they're knocking on your door as well.
Ultimately, I would hope that we can eventually build the largest selection of outdoor recreation equipment in the world, like new and used, and, every model, every top sheet graphic, every color, like, because, that's, I think, from a consumer perspective, you want to go out, like, if you're going to buy a 153 LibTech Orca and you can come to snowboard, right? And you can come to Sendy and see every model, every year, every top sheet graphic, every condition, every price. Like, that's pretty compelling for a consumer to like shop in that environment. And, ultimately, the more that we work with retailers, whether they're e-com or brick and mortar, the better. For me, I really think the value we bring is to these brick and mortar retail shops that want to have an online presence beyond foot traffic. Because Backcountry and REI, they're already very good at what we do, for sure.
I was going to say, Lucy, based on your most recent conversation of the ultimate outdoor app, that is that one thing that solves for all things outdoor, to me, I had the biggest struggle about talking about the retail component because there isn't a one all aggregate for that. So I think we may have discovered what the future of that might be on today's pod.
Yeah. There's another challenger in the mix.
Yeah,
Ian, we were talking about this concept of an app that would do every single thing that we want to do in the outdoors. So it would be tracking our runs and rides. It would be a way to buy gear. It would be a way to share news. It would be a way for brands to interact. And just everything that you'd ever want to do in outdoor, agnostic of sport, just all in one place, one stop shopping, as it were, but also to do all the things. And
we agree with you entirely. It's quite the tech stack to make that happen, but in progress.
Well, and I think what was really interesting about the conversation that we had about that everything app was this discussion of should it be an open or a closed system, because a closed system would require you to build the whole stack yourself, which is great for you because you can shut the door on everyone else. But at the same time, an open system could be really interesting because just like how you're working with retailers now, you could think about how much value that would bring to a brand like Ultra Signup that, their core thing is getting people to plan out their race seasons. If they could come to, Sendy and that could be part of the offering, is like you can sign up for races, but you can also buy shoes, but you can also get news, and you can also track your runs, and you can find coaches. Like it's a big stack, but you start to think about each one of those verticals and who you might be able to bring value to for each one of those. And I think it just gains more and more momentum as you go. And I think this idea of the open system it's a high
Hmm.
level of collaboration with lots and lots of people, but
Yeah.
what value that could bring to so many different people, and in the end, the people using the app as well are going to
Yeah.
win.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And all of that is, it's honestly extremely achievable. And in some ways, I think it's cheaper than most people think. I think outsourcing, having everything open source is fantastic, but the trick is, like, somebody needs to own the overall component, because there are so many things talking to each other and so many tiny lines of code, and if one little thing is not working, it will break something else. And
Mm.
ultimately, like, somebody needs to be behind there finding the broken spots. So yeah, conceptually it's good as long as there's incredible Q&A.
Yeah, you have
Okay.
to have like an API wizard that just like knows how to connect the dots to so many different pieces. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think there's such a huge value, and this stems from my most recent trip from China, where I was using Alipay to do literally every single function,
Exactly.
from
Yep.
getting cars to paying for stuff to booking hotels, and it's all in one spot. So I think it has been done. It can be done.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Ian, another quick question, just around the idea when you're talking about an individual who's selling, let's say, some used gear, and
Mhm.
another customer buys that gear, and the customer has a dispute about something related to that gear. Is Sendy involved in that, or is there a mediator, or is it just back on those two people to resolve?
Great question. So, yeah, right now we have one reason for returns, and that's if the item is different than pictured. And so, obviously, we have all the pictures of the original item. And then, if
Mhm.
someone receives the item and sends us pictures and it's different than pictured, whether it's like different blemishes, different defects, different product, anything, in which case it's eligible for a return, and we get them a prepaid shipping label. It goes back to the seller, and everything's refunded.
Got it.
Um, so yeah, and we do have like a 48-hour grace period after the item is delivered. Somebody has 48 hours to inspect the item before the transaction closes.
I had that question just because as I'm thinking about you being this really broad marketplace, right? Like the future is the aggregate for all things outdoor. And right now you have
Mhm.
components of used gear and you have components of new gear from, smaller brick and mortar independent retailers. I've always been curious about like the future of the circular economy side of that, because as you look at the bigger
Mhm.
brands that have gone after circular economy, most of them to date don't do that themselves. So they have a third
Mhm.
party that like inspects all the gear, repairs it, gets it back out in the world. But I think we've seen all of these stages of what is used and what does circular look like. And I'm curious to hear kind of what you guys are thinking about, for the future, as much as you want to talk and share about that here.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple layers of that. So I think in a certain way, everything has its place. And there are certain applications where sending things into a central hub, having them tuned, fixed, repaired, relisted, that's a great model. It works. There's a market for that. There's a demand for that. I think, both are somewhat limited. The tricky part, I think, comes when, say, I have a snowboard and it's 2 years old and I think it's worth $300. Well, if I send it into somebody to refurbish it, circular economy it, sell it, do it everything for me, someone has to make the margin for making all of that shipping and tuning and reselling and advertising worth it. So that $300 board is now maybe worth $200 because someone has to invest $100 in reselling it, right? And
Mhm.
so that quickly erodes the value of the item for the person who owns the item. And part of, like, I've spent a lot of money on gear in my life. I'm not sponsored like Travis. I don't get free snowboards all the time and stuff. So it's like I literally have spent serious money ever since I was in high school working for like $12 an hour. I'd be like saving up to buy something. And so, part of, I think, enabling more people to get outside and honestly to spend more money on trips, like gas money and whatever they need to get to where they're going and have a good time, is preserving the value in the equipment that you're buying, making it an asset instead of just like a liability, like a money down the drain.
Mm.
Like if you buy a $3,000 mountain bike and you ride it and have like an amazing time for a year or two, and then you sell it for $2,300, and then really it costs you $700 to have 2.5 years of like a great time on a bike.
Mhm.
People would do that in a heartbeat. But if you're like looking at the same bike and saying, dang, am I really going to spend 3 grand on that? And if you're never going to recover value from that, it's a huge difference to a lot of people. And I think
Mhm.
if we can translate that savings to jackets, snowboards, skis, goggles, bikes, everything, right? Then all of
Mhm.
a sudden, all of this stuff that like was previously a waste of money or like a kind of not smart investment, like all of
Mhm.
a sudden you begin to tame that a little bit. And I think that's when we get the circular economy really kicking in, when
Mhm.
like someone is trading these assets. And it's really like for kids, that's an amazing thing too, right? Like a kid who's going to outgrow a snowboard or a bike or anything in every like 12 months, if the parents are now like selling that item for the same price that they purchased that item a year ago, and they have a couple kids, like the
Mhm.
savings for that family are like tens of thousands of dollars over the course of the lifetime of those kids. And so,
Mhm.
like, that's where I think when it makes real economic sense, that's when I see the circular economy beginning to go on a flywheel, like truly.
Yeah, I think
That's
the
incredible.
validator there, you said it earlier, you said it happens in the camera world. And I was just in
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta and I went to KEH last month
Mm-hmm.
and got to see it firsthand. And what you
That's
just
right.
described is exactly where people, and I mean, their business is 45 years old. So, that's a great validator for what you're building here in outdoor. I'm excited to see it.
There's also the other side of that where, you can access pros gear. You can get a Travis Rice or
Mhm.
Travis Rice's snowboard.
Yeah.
You can get Cam Zink's bike. There are
Yeah.
athletes on here who are posting, the real deal. This bike was ridden in Rampage. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because for all of the, everyday riders and weekend warriors that are putting stuff on here, there's also a bunch of pros that are dropping like some pretty hot items on here as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's so one of the functions that we built into Sendy was once you create a posting on Sendy for a piece of gear, you can automatically share it to Instagram stories, and it pulls over from Sendy fully branded like features of gear. And so part of what we were thinking with that is like, okay, if someone posts a piece of gear, usually the first move is to give like their friends and community first dibs on it, right? Hey, I'm selling my bike. Boom. And so like we built that feature for regular customers. But the other component is that professional riders have all of these fans and followers that would freak out to get their board. And we saw that with Travis. Like his boards, they literally don't last 20 seconds on the platform. There are 1,400 people who follow Travis on Sendy. Every time he posts something, they all get a push notification that Travis Rice is posting gear. That thing is gone, right? And so for us, I feel like it's a cool tool for athletes to use to engage their fans and followers and community, and just have one more like touch point, making things like real and personable to them. And for a lot of athletes, they're not living on huge sponsorship contracts, and like being like a pro mountain biker, like you could still be living out of the back of your truck. Like it actually does make a difference to sell a bike or a fork or a whatever. And so I think there are a couple things. One is just professional athletes actually being able to monetize their gear, and just really being able to like have an organic great relationship with their fans, their followers, their friends. And we have a lot that we're working on to keep like building upon that relationship, but really making it very easy for athletes to engage their community in that way, even though they're busy and traveling all the time.
Yeah, this is an NFT on steroids. You don't need the NFT anymore if you can get the real article.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen collectors items go on Sendy too, which are kind of cool. So, speaking to that of like sport, like our sports are so funny, and I think part of it's because it's such a young industry. But I think for the first time we're seeing like we've seen Burton snowboards from like the early 1980s sell for like multiple grand, right?
Mhm.
We've seen like one-off ridden by so and so boards sell for like 8 grand. Like we're starting to see like a collector's value, like an appreciation for the culture of our sport. And I think part of why we haven't seen that emerge is because there hasn't been a platform like Sendy. It's like if you sell like a signed Travis Rice board on like eBay and then you're marketing to like eBay sellers, and are they going to see the value in this board? Like maybe, maybe not, probably not, but
You have to
on
sift through
Sendy, they
so
will.
much more, and the percentage they take is way more egregious than what you're taking. So, yeah, your
Yeah,
marketplace makes
exactly.
way more sense.
Yeah. So if we can foster more of that like culture and those like one-off like cool things, like whether it's from an athlete or it's just like an iconic part of one of these sports history, like it's my favorite stuff to see posted, honestly. It's hard for me not to buy them.
Yeah.
Got to be fun to monitor for that kind of stuff too, just to see when something like that pops up. I'm sure you've got like your
Yeah.
Mount Rushmore of most ridiculous stuff
Mhm.
sold on Sendy so far.
We should. We've One of the things we're thinking about doing is we just launched like a fully trained AI chatbot. So we trained it on like every element of the outdoor recreation industry. Like you can say like, where should I park at Whistler on a POW day? Or like how, like what size cams do I need to climb a certain crack in Yosemite? Or like really we trained it like pretty wild. But we were thinking of once a month on Instagram to post the funniest chats that we get in the bot because we just have people who go in there. Like our community is very funny. Like we see
Yeah.
them engage in comments and chats, and then the chat bot, like, like literally we have people who like, can I buy, cocaine and hookers on Sendy? And the Sendy AI response is, whoa, buddy, keep it on the trail. Like we're about all things outdoors, but we have these people who are just like writing the funniest stuff into our chat bots.
I think that's a great idea of sharing those monthly. I think everybody would get a good kick out of it.
Oh, we're laughing, so someone else probably
Yeah.
laughed too.
We used to do that at Red Bull because there was like an 800 number on the can that you could call in and speak to like a customer rep or whatever, and they would always replay like because people leave weird voicemails and stuff on there
Oh
too,
yeah,
and they
it's a
would play
strange
that
world.
like every month they'd play a handful of them, and you're like, who are these people?
Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah, you think you're talking to AI, but actually like the company is also monitoring it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm most grateful for, and the biggest reason I've worked in this industry and the biggest reason I founded Sendy is because I truly love our like adventure community. We're incredible, and like people are kind and they're helpful and cool and fair, and like we've never had one successful scam ever happen on Sendy. And I think part of why it is people are so fair and nice to each other, and for us to watch the back end of the interactions, it like gives me faith in humanity. Like they're literally like, hey, don't worry about it, buddy. Like I'll, get it out on Tuesday. No sweat. Like everything like so smooth. And I'm just like impressed. I'm impressed by our community. It's cool.
Mhm.
That's really
Very
cool.
cool.
The outdoor community is a special place, and the industry as well. I mean, yeah, such a cool place, and everybody's in it for the same reason, right? Like this
Yeah,
is what it's all about.
Mhm.
What is
it
the
really is.
future? What does the future of Sendy look like? I mean, you've got an AI chatbot that can do literally anything. You've got an app that's got a built-in base that's probably larger than most outdoor apps in total. You've got a website that's functioning quite well and facilitating so much commerce in the outdoor industry. Where do you go from here?
To be honest, what I would love to accomplish in the next like 18 to 24 months is I want Sendy to be buy, sell, rent, and experience, and for all of it to be interactive AI powered. So, in my perfect world, you could find someone to go out into the back country on a ski trip with, rent all the gear that you need, get it covered in insurance, and do all of that in a chat format with our AI, like a virtual travel agent. And then every single person engaging on the app would be reviewed. Which is kind of a self-correcting cycle, right? Like if somebody's out, say you have a fly fisher guide, you go out to Montana and he's super annoying and he doesn't know what he's doing and he talks all the time and the whole trip doesn't work out, and then he's going to get a 1-star review and people aren't going to book, with them. Same with equipment, same with sellers. And so I think Sendy has the ability to be like a self-correcting system as long as we're building all the tools in around it. But I think if we can dramatically reduce the cost of people getting outside on one hand, increase the ability for people to make money out of the things they love. So say you're a fisherman and you want to take people fishing and make some extra money. Great. Say you have a snowmobile and you want to, like I bought a $20,000 snowmobile. If I could rent it out for $500 a weekend and help cover some of that cost, amazing, right? So I think it's just like both bringing down the cost from up here, but bringing up the value of the experience and the asset and the passions that we have for the industry, and really facilitating that in the easiest consumer facing way possible. Like that's our win. And so, like you said, kind of like an all things hub for the
Mhm.
outdoor industry, like that's a probably a 10-year goal. But I think we can make some really good progress towards that in the next like 2 years.
I'm ready. I'm going to send you all the feature requests.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
we get a lot
yeah.
of that. I mean,
The
like,
the good
but
news
that's
is
that's the beauty.
you've seen now a lot of these tech stacks in different verticals, right? Like if you rewind the clock right now 10 years ago, you can think about like what the climb.com was. It was like this
Right.
aggregate discounter in outdoor, right? But they were just taking it from brands. They were not connecting individuals. They weren't working with individual brick and mortar. And similarly, as a hobbyist photographer, anytime I ever rented gear, I had to have my own insurance. Now all those
Yeah.
insurance platforms are in aggregate with it. Similarly on the rental side, I mean, Turo is a great example of
Yeah.
what's happening now with auto, of being able to make some money off of a vehicle you're not using. So I think knowing that those tech stacks exist, clearly you have one of the most badass tech teams on the planet.
Yeah, they're
I
good.
think it can all get there for sure.
Yeah, and the way it gets there is by conversations like this and by feedback from our users. And we wouldn't be where we were if users were not continually telling us to do things. Hey, add this. Hey, I wish it did that. Hey, this is not working, right? Like that's how we get there. And I think the like very beginning of the conversation, you asked about kind of like how to build a software uh, product like this. And I think the most important component is to get something in the market, get people using it, and that will tell you everything you need to know. Like, but you cannot possibly think of every single thing that you need before 1,000 people are using it. And at that point, you're really going to know what you need.
That's got to be the hardest part because you want to build out that MVP, right? The minimum viable product, but you also are trying to launch a brand and you want to have a certain, style to that brand. You want people to think a certain thing, and getting beat up right out of the gate is a difficult place to launch a brand. Like balancing
Oh
those two
gosh.
things has got to be so hard just mentally to deal with on a project that you've worked so hard to just get to where it is, even to be able to launch it, right?
Oh man. I mean, yeah, so we built our MVP. We try to think of everything, right? We're like, this thing's going to be so cool. It's going to do this and this and this. And then, so not only are we like in a war, I'm like bringing Starlinks to Ukraine. We have this like launch date. We then like launch the product and find in the first 6 hours like 100 things that we didn't think of or that were broken. Like that's our first like 6 hours of launch. So it's like the combination of like stress, excitement, sleep deprivation, workload. Like it's just like, oh, it's like compressing like on so many levels. So yeah, that's what it feels like. But the thing is once you get through those 100 things that you were missing and it starts to work, that's the best feeling ever. That's like when you start seeing those transactions happen, you're like, oh my God, it's working. Like this thing is alive, right? Like that's a beautiful feeling. It makes it all worth it.
More along the lines of like lifelong brand admirations. Like as a brand person, that's my whole background. I would love to hear from you, Ian. It doesn't have to be outdoor related. It can just be out in the sphere, but it certainly can as well. Just brands you admire for how they show up in the world.
That is a great question. And yeah, I think part of what differentiated Sendy when we launched is we had a very tight brand, like from day one, right? Like everything was very consistent, very like professional. And I think that was just like a key component. And if you get that wrong, it's over for you, right? It's just such an important component to
Mhm.
the world that we live in, and the way, like, you have to create that emotional experience for someone to connect with your brand, and it has to happen really fast. And so that is, it's such a key component of business, consumer facing business these days. I mean, top of mind, 100% Red Bull. And that's not because I don't like their product. I don't really drink Red Bull unless I'm like desperate, I guess. But yeah, but the brand itself and the team and what they've accomplished is incredible. And what the emotions that they've inspired by what they have funded and created, and the content that they have put out, and the entire media empire that they have generated, is, I think, phenomenal and hard to like compare with anybody else. Um, Obvious ones that come to mind, I think, are Patagonia, which obviously they have like an incredibly core founding story. And like, I admire that. And the fact that they, even though they grew into a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, their founding story was so authentic that it like kept them true to their roots in a certain way. And I think it saved them from like the big box store blowout, like Volcom death, that kind of happens with many sellout brands. Um, Unfortunately, especially in surfing, I don't know why, but yeah. So, I think the fact that they lasted so long and kept their brand integrity like the way they did is really impressive. And then another quick, there are a bunch of them. I think, Lib Technologies does a beautiful job of, keeping it really core. And I guess that's what I guess I respect. Like, I didn't even know that before I started talking, but like, I really like it when brands are authentic and they keep it core, and it's like they know who they are and what their community is. And in a certain way, it's like a person. Like, if you meet somebody and
Mhm.
they're confident, they know what they're about, they know what their values are, they stick to that. And every time you meet them, that person is consistent and the same person, then you're like, hey, I trust this person. I know what this person is all about. And I think that, the brands that accomplish that are the ones that stand the test of time. And, those are a couple I think that have truly done it well.
It does come down to the brands and the people at the brands who live the values, who are practitioners of the thing. Everyone at
Hmm.
LibTech is most likely a
Oh yeah.
snowboarder, right? Like
Oh yeah.
they know the deal and they're going to make decisions that are specific to exactly that. And that's what keeps them core. That's what keeps them, able to maintain that status of being around for a really long time. And I think we all admire and appreciate that element of it.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's especially like nowadays where there's just so much like noise and fluff, and just and I think like we're, as a community, we're not really, we don't want to be over marketed to. Like, we're trying to get
Mhm.
outside in the mountains because we want to get away from all of that stuff, right? And
Mhm.
there's like, our psyche is not built to like take bright red Coca-Cola advertising and like process it. It's like, this not where our head's at. So yeah, I think just for Sendy, it's about keeping it core. And my ultimate like vision is I would love to be able to back a bunch of athlete projects, short content pieces, films, trips, like, and just keep driving the the inspiration. Like, if there was one value that we were communicating as a brand, we always want to like emotionally trigger like a subconscious level of inspiration. So like, even if you're sitting at your desk and you're like having a terrible day and you're grounding it out, and the coffee is sitting in your stomach all gnarly, but then you like see some Sendy like content and you're like, dude, that is epic. I feel
Mhm.
amazing. Humans can do that. I love that. That's beautiful, right? Like, those feelings, emotions in humans are like what we want to inspire as a brand. And I think as a community, that's what we all want to inspire. That's what we're chasing. Makes it all really easy. It's kind of a North Star.
And what better way to cheer yourself up when you're having a bad day like that than to go on Sendy and buy a new snowboard?
Mhm.
Yeah. Or check our Instagram out. We post some crazy stuff.
I'm
Awesome.
in. I mean, I think that's it, right? Like, the best marketing is good product, and this speaks for itself, right? This is a great way for people to get on fresh gear, try some new stuff, get in the door with, pretty much any sport in the outdoors. And yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
thank you.
great stuff. I mean, this is like a catalog. I'm just scrolling through here and there's
Oh yeah, yeah.
no shortage at
No,
all.
it's yeah, and it's just a start. We're always most critical of ourselves, and I think, our team is like that. Like, we have so much work to do, and anytime we look at anything, we can't help but see the 100 more things that need to be done to make it better. So it's constantly evolving. Like, the Sendy that you're looking at right now is not the same Sendy that you would have seen 3 months ago. It's like literally that speed of evolution. And to create the everything app of all things, it's like that's the speed that we need to be moving. Like, it is very fast.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for all this. We usually close with a segment called brand product content, which is essentially something that we found really interesting in, those one of those three categories of either a brand we admire, a product that we're excited about, or some content that we dug. But
Cool.
and to give you a little window, so I'm not totally springing this on you, I got to ask Sharky. One of our BPCs recently was Barbarian Days, which Ian, I'm sure, has read cover to
Oh yeah.
cover. How you doing, Sharky? You start reading this book yet?
Well, that's perfectly on the nose there, Lutzi, because I said that it was going to go to the top of my stack, and it did not go to the top of my stack. And I have the most dense book in the world that is my content for today's BPC that is still superseding my reading of Barbarian Days. So I'm still guilty as charged as ever, but I will jump in and at least share the one that I am reading as I try and hide from that question once again. My content for the week is a book by Malcolm Harris called Palo Alto, and the subtitle of the book is A History of California Capitalism and the World, and it is just shy of 700 pages. So in full disclosure, I am not all the way through it yet, but it is a fascinating read on what I would say is probably one of the most honest tellings of California history that I've ever read. And certainly there are a number of books that tackle that subject, but the way that we all learned about it in school is very different than the real stories. And he kind of shines some light on those real stories at a state level, and then really hyper focuses in on the gold rush and kind of the founding of San Francisco and the peninsula and the Bay. And then it goes through essentially a whole history of all of the incredible and phenomenal technology and companies that have come from the region. So it's been an incredible read so far. And as soon as I get through it, Barbarian Days is right underneath it. So almost there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't even surf, and I still think Barbarian Days is one of the best like books I've ever read. I don't
It's so good. Yeah. I mean, I think I read it in 4 hours or something. Like, I literally just started reading and read the whole thing. It was like one of those books, I like literally didn't put it down. And, and it's like that guy's like, he's definitely a surfer, but he's like one level down from like the hardcore, pure devotional surfers. But he's such a good writer, and he's able to capture like the emotion of a lot of it. And it was a complete page turner. I would highly recommend it to anybody. A really good book.
This is like an ongoing thing with Sharky. We've been trying to get this dude to read Barbarian Days for like months now.
Where you screwed up is you're suggesting a book that I can finish in 4 hours. If it was 700 or 800 pages, I might take it on.
Yeah,
that's my excuse.
It's the opposite. It's the exact opposite of what you're reading. There's nothing dense about it.
Yeah,
that's a good one. All right, Ian, you got something for our BPC, or do you want me to go?
Oh, go ahead. Give me a second.
Okay, so I actually have a book as well, and we don't typically always do books, but I actually just ordered this book. It's called Founding Sales, and it's from Peter Kazanji. And I was listening to a podcast from the president of Y Combinator, which is like a big Silicon Valley startup, whatever. And he just offhand made this comment of like, oh, every brand or every business that we bring into Y Combinator, we give them this book. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get that one. And it sounds from the outset, I think it arrives today, but I'm really fired up about it. It sounds like it's basically helping people understand how essentially sales works, because a lot of us come from marketing, but we want to start brands. We want to get even deeper into business and building out the flywheel and all these elements. And I I'd never felt like I could find a book to help me truly understand sales, which is, it's part of the deal. Unfortunately, we can't just always make awesome content and hope for the best. Like, you got to do the rest of the 360 here. And so my fingers are crossed, but I have a good feeling that if Y Combinator is passing this book out like candy, it's probably a good read.
What was the name of it one more time?
It's called Founding Sales. It actually has
Okay.
it has a surf wave on the front of it.
It's very relevant to what I'm doing. Cool. Well, I'll give you a book and a product. So I think one book that I have every employee at Sendy read is called The Cold Start Problem. It's by Andrew Chen. He's an investor at A16Z, a very prominent fund out of the Bay Area. And yeah, it is a deep dive on the hardest part of doing what we did, which is like, how do you take something from like zero to something, right? It is like, that is the trick. And so I think that book was critical for our thinking and success. Every person who works with us reads it. And then product wise, I'm going to have to go Skidoo Gen 5 Turbo 165 sled. I think those guys just built the most incredible product. I probably just pissed off half of the audience who rides Polaris, but honestly, that factory turbo is like super bulletproof and reliable and awesome. And I'd love having it out in the mountains when I'm way in the backcountry.
I've just added another book to my list. So actually, I guess I added to Sharky. I don't know if I'm going to read Palo Alto, but
you can read that when you're retired.
Yeah. Maybe this is the agreement we need, Lutzi. Maybe if you read Palo Alto, I will finally read Barbarian Days.
Don't threaten me with a good time, man. I got you. I'm in. Awesome. Ian, thank you so much for being on the pod. This was a really great conversation, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this. So thanks again for being here.